Mark Rogers TV talking USC football. We bring in Ryan Abraham. You can catch him on uscfootball.com for the very finest in USC football coverage. The Trojans heading to the Cotton Bowl to take on Ohio State. Ryan, how you doing tonight?
Pretty good, Mark. What's up?
Not too much. So this bowl bid, I know for us old timers that are used to the way the bowl bids used to go out and the strong alliances between the bowls and the conferences that weren't interrupted based on the college football playoffs. This smells and feels of Rose Bowls gone by. That's what it is. USC and Ohio State, they've met in more Rose Bowls than any other two matchups, two teams.
Yeah, it's kind of a Rose Bowl with better barbecue, I guess. You're going to be southern, in Texas as opposed to Southern California. And it's kind of nice. Actually, the Fiesta Bowl with Washington and Penn State, that's a Pac-12, Big Ten feel, and of course at USC and Ohio State. The Rose Bowl itself is the one game that doesn't have the Big Ten and Pac-12 matchup, but this Ohio State, USC, the two blue bloods from the two conferences that normally meet in the Rose Bowl. And I think they're kind of similar teams too, where they always have 4- and 5-star recruiting classes, a lot of talent, but don't always play up to that potential. I think both of these teams, especially this year, kind of showed that.
Ryan Abraham joining us from uscfootball.com, Trojans and the Buckeyes at the Cotton Bowl. And I'm sure you go back quite a ways on this one, Ryan, in regards to the Ohio State-US series that has been dominated by the Trojans. 7 consecutive wins going back to the mid-'70s and a Rose Bowl win for the Buckeyes. I know that I remember Charles White going over the top in the 1980 Rose Bowl, a win that deprived Ohio State of a national championship. There was a game a few years later after the 1984 season in which USC upset Ohio State at the Rose Bowl. They've had a couple of home-and-home series, one in the late 80s when USC was substantially better at that time. Ohio State still getting established under John Cooper at that point and didn't have some of its better teams in play at that point. And then just fairly recently, I guess it's now been close to 10 years, but in 2008 and 2009 with USC winning back-to-back games, really taking out what turned out to be a good Ohio State team that went to the Fiesta Bowl in 2008 and tied for the Big Ten title, and that game wasn't close. That was just kind of the crescendo or ending conclusion of those great Pete Carroll teams in 2008. And then the very next year, Ohio State went on to win the Rose Bowl and beat Oregon, but in Columbus, Matt Barkley led the Trojans down the field for a game-winning touchdown in a very hotly contested game. So just kind of your memories of Ohio State USC.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Rose Bowl matchups are always great, and you said it before, the two teams that have met the most in the Rose Bowl. USC's, won more Rose Bowls than any other team has been to, but when they go, Ohio State is that kind of classic matchup with, Michigan a little bit too. But just, the last time these two teams played, I went to Columbus and I was on the field. I think it was like the first time ESPN was trying out like some of their 3D technology, and it was a big deal. People remember Matt Barkley, but really Joe McKnight, who recently passed away, he had a huge game in that one, and it was a big win, I think, for USC, and having freshman Matt Barkley come out there and do it. It was that was really like the the end of the Pete Carroll era. There weren't the teams that weren't quite as good. It would have been fun to see them play in like the 2004 or 5, that range. Anyone that USC played out of conference in those years that just blew out, like Arkansas and Auburn and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that last one, I think a lot of USC fans, some of the younger ones at least, remember that. If you went out to the Horseshoe, that was such a great environment. So to have these two teams play together, I know it's crazy. It's been almost a decade, but I think it'll be a really good matchup.
Talking Trojans with Ryan Abraham. You can catch him on uscfootball.com with, of course, USC taking on Ohio State. The two teams left out of the college football playoff at number 5 and number, I believe, 7 in the country, or number 8 in the country. What does it matter at this point? They are just on the outside of the college football playoff, but still in a marquee matchup in one of the New Year's 6 games at the Cotton Bowl. Ryan, the last we talked to you was following, or actually just prior to the Pac-12 championship game in a matchup against Stanford. It was a really good football game, one in which I think most of the time USC, I thought, showed to be the better team, but certainly Stanford hung right in there, and it was an extremely close game down to the wire at 31-28. Just your thoughts about the performance of the Trojans in the Pac-12 title game.
Yeah, it wasn't certainly wasn't a repeat performance the first time these two teams played. that was the best game USC played all year in week number 2, just blowing out Stanford. But in this game, USC dominated the yardage. Some of the stats you look at, over 500 yards of offense for USC. Stanford only completed 10 passes in the game, but they made big plays and plays when it counted. And there were times where maybe a USC DB looked like he was in good position and didn't make the play. Stanford has great tall receivers and they do a really good job, with the ball downfield. So I think that they hurt USC at really critical moments. And you feel like at halftime, USC should have been up by, 14 points or something and end up being only up by 3. And they kind of hung around. I think it was kind of a microcosm of USC's entire football season where you're talking about a team that looks like they should be winning more points than they are, and they just usually aren't. But at the end, you just kind of get a feeling like they're going to do enough. And that there was a goal line stance that was really amazing. 7 plays from inside the 10 or whatever for Stanford, and coming up just short, and then USC going 99 yards the other way. That's just kind of the way this team has gone, where they're kind of on the ropes and they look like, man, they could fall behind, and then they do something, make a big play. Someone makes a big play, and then they get the offense cranking. I mean, but to go 99 yards against Stanford was pretty crazy in the title game, and that's but that's kind of the way this team has been. So I thought it was a really good kind of microcosm of USC's whole season that game.
In terms of the passing game, I think it was of note that Deontay Burnett did not have a huge game, didn't have to have one. I think he had 1 reception for less than 10 yards because I think there was a point in the season, and it was certainly somewhat expected going into the season based on Sam Darnold's run down the stretch and Deontay Burnett's uprising at the conclusion of 2016 and his play in the Rose Bowl, that these two were really locked in, and maybe Darnold was relying on Burnett a little bit too much, but they're able to win that caliber of a game, a Pac-12 championship game against Stanford, and not have to rely on Deontay Burnett and Sam Darnold going to some other guys.
Yeah, that was really interesting. And they haven't said, I mean, they've been a little cautious or coy about what some of the injuries are. You kind of get the feeling he might be banged up a little bit, that they haven't necessarily talked about. I think he only had 33 plays maybe in the game. It's not like he played the whole time. But you saw in this game, Michael Pittman, who was injured early in the season, that you felt like, hey, he might be a factor this year, really had a slow start. But he set a Pac-12 championship game record with, I think it was 146 receiving yards. He had that big 50-something yarder from the 1-yard line that really took USC out of the danger zone there. And we've seen Tyler Vaughn's emerge. I think Stephen Mitchell has played pretty well throughout the year. So I think the beginning of the season, he wasn't really sure. Losing Juju Smith-Schuster and losing Darius Rogers and some of the other guys. I mean, there's 4 receivers that were really his main targets that were all gone. And we saw, like you said, Deontay Burnett kind of come on towards the end. They really relied on him a lot in the beginning of the season, and now more guys have emerged. So if Burnett doesn't play a whole lot, like he didn't really in the championship game, there were still enough guys out there that he could rely on. So I think that's helped Sam Darnold's game develop throughout the year, just knowing that there's more targets. I think Tyler Vaughn's is going to be a really special player. And we saw what Michael Pittman can do. He's a big-bodied guy. And it shows he can run also. He's running away from some guys. So I think it's helped him. It took a little while, but I think Sam Darnold now feels comfortable with the group of receivers he has.
We're discussing USC football with Ryan Abraham. Join him on uscfootball.com as the Trojans prepare for the Buckeyes on December 29th, leading into the New Year's Six bowl games there at the Cotton Bowl. Coaching upheaval, that's typically the topic this time of year. In addition to the bowl preparation, it's that season. Little has affected USC in their preparation or soon-to-be preparation, but we do have some coaching news and a particular departure.
Yeah, it's interesting. So my wife's actually a Tennessee grad, so I've been getting minute-by-minute updates of what's going on with this coaching search, which has been a disaster. If you've followed the Tennessee stuff, firing the AD, it's nuts. And so they finally named their guy Jeremy Pruitt, and a lot of people speculated that T. Martin, USC's offensive coordinator and wide receivers coach, who won a national championship at Tennessee in 1998, would be returning maybe to his alma mater in some capacity. Some people thought maybe the head coach. Obviously, he's not named the head coach. But you thought of USC's offensive staff, he would be the one to going to Tennessee. Well, that wasn't the case. And my buddy Bruce Feldman tweeted out this morning, look for Tyson Helton. And I was like, what? For Tennessee? Like, I didn't even know there was some kind of connection there. But apparently, I think Jeremy Pruitt and him, there was some kind of connection with Alabama. But there's some connection there between those two. I mean, South Alabama. And then it broke out later in the day that he was going to be the offensive coordinator there. So I think for USC, it's interesting because they really had two guys up in the booth that were involved in the play calling. T. Martin and then Tyson Helton was supposedly doing the third down stuff. I just didn't think that was working, and they needed one voice up in the press box. Thought it would be T. Martin that would leave, and maybe Tyson would take over. Now it's Tyson Helton, so Clay Helton's brother is leaving and going to Tennessee. So it should be interesting for him. I thought he did a nice job when he was at Western Kentucky. He wasn't the play caller, but he was the the offensive coordinator. Did some play calling at USC. Now he's going to take things over, it looks like, at Tennessee. So we haven't really seen a lot of departures and stuff on this coaching staff since Clay Helton took over. Just one last year, but already one, and it's his brother. So that's kind of a weird one to have. It not one I expected to see or hear about.
You know, Ryan, this time of year going into bowl play, much is made of motivation and trying to forecast what team is going to show up because of the incentive to play. Are you an overachieving team that maybe had a sub 500 record last year and is just happy to be somewhere warm for the postseason and playing in a bowl game? Or is it the reverse? And you would think for Ohio State in particular, because the talk was very heavy concerning the college football playoff. But to a certain extent, the same could be said of USC. They had similar credentials, although the talk didn't center necessarily around USC. There was still a glimmer of hope to possibly catch somebody in regards to a faction of that 13-member committee and push themselves into the playoffs and maybe get some chaos on that final weekend as well. But just your thoughts about what you're hearing and your general vibe of how Clay Helton's going to approach this to get his team up for this game.
Yeah, I think winning the Pac-12 for USC was very important. So I think that's kind of their reward. That really was the goal all year. They put a lot into that, trying to make sure that they could win the conference. So I think the motivation factor should be okay. It's interesting that the second year in a row that they're playing the playoff snub in the New Year's Six Bowl. Because last year Penn State was the team that was the last one out. It came down apparently to Penn State and Washington. Washington gets in. USC gets Penn State, who it was a heck of a game over there in the Rose Bowl. And now Ohio State was the team that most people, I thought they would be the one to get in. So 2 years in a row. So I think at least Clay Helton knows, like, hey, we know what it's like to play this team that really thought they were going to be in the playoff. We saw Penn State come out, and I don't think there was any motivation issues with Penn State. I don't think there will be any with Ohio State either. So it's one of those games that the kind of matchup, the marquee matchup, being in a classic game like the Cotton Bowl, I don't think there's going to be a motivating factor on either side. But it is interesting. 2 years in a row, USC kind of gets stuck with the team that got left out of the playoff.
I hadn't thought of that, but that's a good point with Penn State and Ohio State the past 2 years taking on USC, and hopefully we get a similar, not necessarily result depending on your side, but an entertaining game of the likes of the 2017 Rose Bowl that went down to the wire 52-49. I never understood the motivation argument in regards to, if you look at most of the teams that reach postseason play, 90% of them had no chance to win a national championship. Even the majority of them about mid-season on had no chance of winning a conference championship. I know that we're not speaking of Ohio State and USC, but I would think as a head coach, one motivating factor would be, think about this. Until USC played in the Pac-12 championship game, they didn't have all eyes on them. For as big a program, all the prestige, all the attention, there are a zillion college football games going on every Saturday. And even if you're playing a primetime ABC game, let's say, you still have like 4 or 5 other games you're competing with. There are always games on, and the audience is fractured. But when you're in a bowl game, and especially this caliber bowl game, everybody's watching. Don't you want to impress the nation when you're on the big stage, regardless of what it means? And again, for the majority of those teams that didn't even play for a conference championship the last 3 or 4 games of the season, they weren't playing for so much of anything except for maybe going 8-4 instead of 7-5. And suddenly they're on a big stage and playing in a bowl game. And they know that anybody who wants to watch college football right then and there has to watch them. And they have more eyes on them at any point in the season. I would think that that would be some level of motivation.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think most of the teams that make bowl games, I mean, that's like the crescendo to the season. Everyone wants to, play in the bowl game. We have seen occasions, though. I think it might have been the kick six year, like where Alabama played like Oklahoma in the Sugar Bowl and just didn't even like show up. Like we've seen that happen, and I think that's part of the we love college football, but part of the unfortunate part of this sport is that you do play everything all the whole season, and you take like a month off, and then you play again. And sometimes you just see teams that they don't even look like the same team. You're wondering, like, you take a month off from whatever you're doing. It's not like the momentum carries through. Some teams are really hot at the end, and then a month later, for whatever reason, they don't play all that well. So I think you're right. I think motivation factor, most teams are going to still be motivated for it. We've seen like USC a few years ago when they went to the Sun Bowl, they just didn't even want to be there. If a team doesn't want to be there, I could see that happening. But for the most part, I think teams, do want to be there. They do want to kind of show up because, like you said, all eyes are on them.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, recent history with Penn State, they showed up. They didn't get the win, but entertaining game and right down to the wire. And then 2 years ago, an Ohio State team that was supposed to get to the playoff, preseason number 1, ran the table for most of the season, lost in the last play of the game to Michigan State. Could have been unmotivated for a Notre Dame team in the Fiesta Bowl, but they went out there and routed the Irish. So maybe the teams have a little bit more pride than we give them credit for. USC, Ohio State Cotton Bowl. I'm looking forward to this one. Ryan, before we get down to the big nuts and bolts, maybe we save that for another time, and hopefully we'll be able to catch up with you here in the next few weeks.
Yeah, that sounds great. It's kind of start breaking the game down. People are asking, like, what's your prediction? I'm like, I don't know yet. Like, got to look at some stuff. But I do think there's some similarities. Both teams have a lot of talent. Sometimes they play well. Sometimes they don't play well. It's just you're not really sure. That might be why Ohio State didn't get in. I mean, they had a couple kind of clunker games. USC had the same sort of thing. So, it's a team that when they play to their best, both teams can really be exceptional, but they don't always play to their best.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one, and I would expect both teams to show up in fine fashion. Urban Meyer, based on his track record, Clay Helton, shorter track record, just taking over in a bowl game. Let's see, at the end of 2016 or 2015, matching up against Wisconsin. Let's see in the Holiday Bowl, and then coming back with that great stretch drive and winning the Rose Bowl last year. So nothing wrong with Clay Helton's postseason history here just recently with the Trojans in the Rose Bowl. Ryan Abraham, you can join him on uscfootball.com. Please just check it out. If you love college football like I do, even if USC is not your team, you got to look at the coverage right there as the Trojans prep for the Buckeyes. Ryan, we appreciate the time.
Anytime. Thanks so much for having me on. Great talking college football.